She went down so fast, there was no distress call. No life rafts were deployed, and there were no survivors.
Welcome to Curious World History. My name is Colleen.
And my name's Albert.
Good morning, Albert. How are you?
Good.
I'm glad to hear that. Today we're going to talk about a very famous shipwreck, but not the Titanic. Which one is this?
The Edmund Fitzgerald.
The Edmund Fitzgerald. Now tell us a little bit about this ship. Was this a passenger ship?
It was a bulk freighter.
A bulk freighter. So what does that mean?
So it carries ore, iron ore, coal, sand, grain, all
So
that stuff.
Big kinds of items, not like a cargo ship where they're carrying finished goods, but more like the ingredients they need to do things. Interesting. Tell us when the ship was made.
It was launched in June 7th, 1958.
1958, okay. And tell us about where this ship was sailing. Was this out in the ocean? Or?
No, it was in the Great Lakes.
The Great Lakes. Now, are those freshwater or are they saltwater?
Freshwater.
Freshwater. This is going to factor into what happens later because I learned something that was so interesting to me about the difference between freshwater and saltwater when it comes to boating. Okay, tell us more.
It was 129 feet or 222 meters. It was the largest on the lakes at the time.
The largest boat on the lakes? Really? The largest ship? That's amazing. It did seem like it was huge. So for reference, an American football field is 100 yards, which is roughly 300 feet. So this was more than 2 football fields together. Okay.
It was nicknamed the Pride of the American Side.
The Pride of the American Side. I love that.
It was named after Edmund Fitzgerald. The ship was owned by the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company and operated by Ogle Bay Norton Company.
You know, what's interesting is Edmund Fitzgerald was the chairman of Northwestern Mutual. So I think that's how they got the name.
Yeah.
And chairman's like a very important position in a company.
And I heard it's bad luck if you name a ship after someone.
Is that true? Really? That's interesting. I did not know that. You know, what's interesting is that his grandfather had captained a ship on the Great Lakes and his father owned a shipyard and both had ships named after them. So it's bad luck, but it was a family tradition. The thing I want to talk about is that when we talk about ships, a lot of times they say she. When they're talking about a ship, they give it feminine pronouns. So it's just something to keep in mind when you hear someone saying she. Sometimes it's like, who are they talking about? But they're talking about the ship.
Okay. She weighed over 13 gross tons.
Wow.
She was built in the Great Lakes Engineering Works in River Rouge, Michigan. She was christened by the wife of Edmund Fitzgerald.
Do you know what christening a ship is?
They throw a bottle.
Yeah, they usually break a bottle of champagne on the bow of the ship.
And I think they had to throw it 3 times for it to work.
To break? I've seen that happen before.
So it was bad luck.
It's interesting with shipping. In anything in maritime history, maritime practices, and maritime means something when you're like working on the ocean or a big lake or something like that. One of the things that I've noticed is it's a very superstitious industry. And I think it's because it's so old that before we had scientific reasons for things, people would make them up.
Yeah.
And it would be about ghosts or monsters or something else. So this is one of those industries that maintains a certain degree of superstition.
She was a point of civic pride. Crowds came to see her. She held speed and cargo records on the lakes. For 17 years, she was a reliable workhorse of the American steel industry.
The term workhorse means something that isn't necessarily always fancy, but it works really hard and you can always count on it being there. She had had a couple of captains in her lifetime. one of her former captains was someone they nicknamed the DJ captain. And his name was Captain Peter Pulser, and he was known for piping music over the ship's intercom day and night as they were passing through the different rivers, the St. Clair and Detroit rivers, and the crowds would line up to listen to it and to kind of cheer them on. Isn't that a riot?
Mm-hmm. So her final voyage was on November 9th, 1975. The Fitzgerald departed from Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with 26,116 tons of taconite pellets, bound for a steel mill in Detroit. Her captain was Ernest McSorley, a veteran mariner with decades of experience on the lake. She was sailing in company with another vessel, the Arthur M. Anderson, captained by Jesse Cooper. The two ships tracked each other by radar and stayed in radio contact throughout their journey.
And why do you think they would do that?
So they don't get lost?
Yeah, I think when you're out either on a great lake like that, a huge lake, they look like oceans. That's how big they are.
Yeah.
If you stand, for instance, where I've stood when visiting my sister Chelsea years ago, when you stand on the edge of the lake, Lake Michigan, for instance, in Chicago, and you look out over the lake, you cannot see the other side. It really genuinely looks like an ocean. It's got waves. It is pretty fierce looking, and it's got terrible storms that come through. So it is an amazing place. It truly is.
During the afternoon of November 10th, the Fitzgerald reported problems. Two vents were damaged, and the ship had developed a list. It leaned to one side and was taking on water. McSorley radioed the Anderson.
We're holding our own.
And those were the last words ever heard from the Edmund Fitzgerald. At approximately 7:10 p.m. on November 10th, 1975, the Fitzgerald disappeared from the Anderson's radar screen. She sank in 530 feet of water, roughly 17 miles northwest of Whitefish Point, Michigan, just miles from the relative shelter of Whitefish Bay. She went down so fast there was no distress call, no life rafts were deployed, and there were no survivors.
How many people died?
29 all crew members.
All crew members, 29 crew members.
The wreck was located within days by the U.S. Navy. Subsequent dives and surveys revealed that the ship had broken in two on the surface, or just below it.
That's right.
The bow section plunged nose first into the lake bed, while the stern section came to rest upside down nearby. The violence of the sinking was extraordinary. In 1994 and 1995, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society conducted expeditions and recovered the ship's bell, replacing it with a replica bell engraved with all of the names of the 29 crew members. The recovered bell is now on display at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point, Michigan, the same point the Fitzgerald was trying to reach when she sank.
So they have put a museum in a place where she was supposed to land, right? Yeah.
The cause has never been defined, and it remained one of the great maritime mysteries. Three main theories have been debated: hatch cover failure, shoaling, and structural failure.
Do you know what shoaling is?
It might have struck a uncharted shoal, which is a reef.
Yeah, it's kind of like a reef. It comes up. It's a point. It's a high point in the land that's under the water, so that if you don't know it's there and you're on a ship, you might accidentally scrape up against it. And I heard that something that hadn't been released is that they found paint that was the same color. I think it was maroon paint on a shoal. Under the water. So there is a possibility that they were holding their own. even though the seas were rather high, the waves were high, but that the boat scraped up against a shoal, and that may have, caused a problem with how the boat was moving on the waves.
Yeah. The Fitzgerald became immortalized in popular culture almost immediately. Canadian folk singer Gordon Lightfoot released the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald in 1976.
I think that's one of the more interesting parts of this. I wonder if we would remember this shipwreck as much throughout the country and maybe throughout the world if it weren't for the fact that Gordon Lightfoot had written and recorded a song that chronicled this. And did you know that Gordon Lightfoot took some of the royalties and money that came in from the song and he created a fund for the families?
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, so he was, when he heard about this wreck, he was truly heartbroken about what had happened. You think about the 29 men whose lives were lost and their families who were waiting for them to come home, and they never came home.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these men were quite young. And so Gordon had written that, and he was kind of cautious about the song being released.
Yeah.
His worry, well, do you know what his worry was?
That people might say that disrespectful.
It was disrespectful, right? That's an ongoing problem when telling the story of a recent tragedy. You and I had sort of that experience when we were in New York City at the 9/11 memorial. Do you remember there were people taking photographs and sort of smiling in front of the monument, which is essentially an open grave in a way, right? It's a mass grave. I think he felt the same way. He wanted to tell the story in a sensitive and respectful tone to honor those men. And he didn't want his releasing that song to be seen as him profiting from their deaths and profiting from the pain of those who were lost. One of the other things I thought that was interesting is the diving on the wreck was something that was quite controversial. Did you read about that?
No.
So what happened was they wanted to see what occurred. So they dove down into the wreck, and the divers, it's very deep, right? It's hard to get down there. The divers removed the bell, and the families were upset about that. There was a goal to actually do some kind of tour with the bell. In other words, have the bell travel from place to place. And the families felt as though that was an example of perhaps being disrespectful about the loss of their family members. So they've been very careful ever since. And Canada, because this is close to the Canadian side, Canada has said this is a grave and you are not allowed to dive on it unless you get express permission from the Canadian government. And I think that is to honor those who were lost.
And it sank in November, and some people call it the Witch of November. It's very dangerous in November.
Oh.
It's like the end of the shipping season.
Oh. So they call the risk on the water the Witch of November. Interesting. So I heard that there were multiple nicknames of the boat itself.
The Pride of the American side.
So there are others. I also heard it called the Queen of the Great Lakes, the Toledo Express, and the Titanic of the Great Lakes. I know. That's a nickname that's a tough one because you and I did an episode on the Titanic, and that is a famous shipwreck. I don't think I probably would nickname a ship after that. So I read that the Edmund Fitzgerald had lost both radars during the storm, and they were actually relying on the Arthur M. Anderson to help navigate. And that was part of the reason that they stayed there. So I alluded earlier to the difference between salt water and fresh water.
Yeah.
Did you read about that at all in terms of what that means for boating?
I think salt water makes it float more.
Yes, it does.
And fresh water makes it sink more.
Yes, so that's a part of it. Salt water makes things buoyant. In other words, they float. If any of the listeners have ever swum in a lake, they are moving a little bit more quickly, and their bodies have a tendency to sink. But if you go to a very salty lake or a salty part of the ocean, you feel as though it's very easy to float. So that's one thing. The second thing is the salt water takes some of the edges off of the waves. So in other words, they are more predictable. The waves are farther apart on the ocean. So in this lake, the waves are unpredictable, and they can come one after the other, after the other, after the other, without much of time in between. And in this case, I heard that the waves were 25 to 35 feet, which is incredibly high.
Wow.
So I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
Yeah.
Must have been very scary. So in Gordon Lightfoot's song, he talks about a Chippewa legend, Chippewa being an indigenous tribe in the United States. And it turns out that that part of the song was actually not true, that there is not a Chippewa legend. Let's go to myth versus fact.
Okay.
You ready?
Mhm.
Gordon Lightfoot's song gets the story basically right. Myth or fact?
Fact?
Some of it is actually not correct, but I think he got it mostly right. Some of the things that weren't correct are she wasn't headed to Cleveland. As you mentioned earlier, she was headed near Detroit. Also, she wasn't fully loaded. And then the Chippewa legend was also incorrect.
Okay.
Myth versus fact. The Edmund Fitzgerald sent out a distress signal before she went down.
Myth.
Really? Why?
Because it sank very quickly.
It sank very quickly, and she did not have a chance to send out a distress signal. Okay. Myth or fact? They know what caused the sinking of the ship.
Myth.
That's true. They still don't know. There are lots of suggestions about what could have happened, lots of theories, but the conclusions have always been disputed. They just don't know. Myth or fact? No one has ever gone down diving to the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Myth.
That's true. You're absolutely right. Multiple expeditions have visited the wreck, including Jacques Cousteau's Calypso in 1980. And in 1995, 2 scuba divers, without a submersible, physically touched the wreck, which set a Great Lakes depth record in the process. One last thing I will say is that every year on the anniversary of the sinking, that they ring the bell from the church over in Whitefish Bay 29 times. And when Gordon died, they rang it 30 times. Once for every life lost on the Edmund Fitzgerald, and once for Gordon.
We also have merch.
We have a merch shop, that's right.
Like a water bottle, a t-shirt.
That's right. You're wearing one of the t-shirts right now, and I'm drinking from one of the water bottles right now.
And we also have a YouTube channel.
That's right. We have a YouTube channel. Now, we don't have videos on there, but it's audio recordings because we're an audio recorded podcast. And you can find all of those things on CuriousWorldHistory.com. Well, thank you very much, Albert.
You're welcome. This is Curious World History.